You know, Batman has a strict moral code, but now he's doing things like hacking into cell phones and using surveillance to spy on an entire city. I'm starting to think he might be running for office. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss The Dark Knight. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair are the two people that helped decide that The Dark Knight was the best comic book movie from the 2000s. First, he's just like Alfred, wise, dependable, and probably secretly annoyed at his boss's antics. From the 80s Flick Flashback Podcast, it's Tim Williams.
How about a magic trick? I'm going to make this pencil disappear. Like my voice.
And also, our Joker expert. Not because he's a criminal mastermind, but because he's always got a card up his sleeve when it comes to pop culture knowledge. From Pop Culture Roulette, it's Nicholas Pepin.
I was hoping I was going to be the one with the secret boss thing, because I'm not secretly annoyed by my boss, but that's a whole other podcast.
Thanks everybody for tuning in on this episode where we are going to discuss the movie that a couple weeks ago the three of us decided was the best movie of the 2000s. But I will say that the fall-winter crud has hit two of the three of us. So I'm battling a little bit of a cough, if you notice it in my voice, and you probably also have noticed that Tim is also battling some vocal issues. But we're gonna, you know what? If there's an episode to talk about vocal issues,
right? Yeah, it fits. Yeah,
yeah. Because there is no way Christian Bale walked out of making this movie with his throat in 100% condition.
Right,
and it only got worse from there.
Right.
All right, so we are talking about The Dark Knight, which was released July 18th of 2008. Of course, directed by Christopher Nolan, this being the second of the Dark Knight trilogy. And yes, we have covered the entire Dark Knight trilogy way back in one of our very first episodes, Chad Smith and I. But we are just talking about this movie today, the one and only Dark Knight. We're not talking about Batman Begins. We're not talking about The Dark Knight Rises. We're just talking about The Dark Knight. This 2 hour and 30 minute, just a little over 2 hour and 30 minute movie. But let's jump into it. Let's talk about the comic book connections.
This is the comic book connection theme.
The Dark Knight draws significant inspirations from several iconic Batman comics. The most notable influence is The Long Halloween by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, which explores the mob's grip on Gotham and Batman's evolving relationship with Harvey Dent, foreshadowing his transformation into Two-Face. Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns informs the tone and themes of this movie, particularly the psychological complexity of Batman and the Joker. Alan Moore and Brian Boland's The Killing Joke provides insights into the Joker's chaotic philosophy, with the idea of him as an agent of pure anarchy, central to Heath Ledger's portrayal. Elements of Batman Year One by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli also shape Gotham's gritty atmosphere and Bruce Wayne's vigilantism, making the movie a compelling fusion of Batman's rich comic book legacy. Are either of you guys familiar with any of those comics?
I have a passing knowledge on most of them. I haven't had a chance to read a lot of it. I mean, I've definitely read the Frank Miller stuff, but
yeah, I've read The Long Halloween, and I've read The Killing Joke. And I think it's been a long time when I read Frank Miller, Batman Year One. I think I did read that, but it's been a while.
So of what you're familiar with those comics, do you see the connection between this and those?
There's loose connections.
Yeah. It's not a direct adaptation or anything.
I can see some nods to those comics for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see how Nolan took a lot of pieces from a lot of this and that and kind of weaved it in and didn't try to stray too far from the Batman mythos. He got a little far with some of the side characters, but with Batman himself, he kind of stayed pretty close to where Batman was supposed or is.
Yeah, and I prefer that in my comic movie. Like, I prefer that you just at least are aware enough of the mythos of the character and the legacy of the character that you can create a story that is true to the character without necessarily having to adapt an actual story. Because I think sometimes when they try too hard to adapt an actual story, I think you run into too much of upsetting the audience.
Right, because they're expecting one thing, and if you change something they don't want to be changed, then it becomes a bigger issue.
Yeah. All right, well, let's get into this legendary cast, if you will. So we got Batman, Bruce Wayne, played once again by Christian Bale. We're just going to go ahead and stop and talk about this, though. What do you think about his voice as Batman in this one? Because it is drastically different from Batman Begins.
Yeah, I think I was reading something where Nolan actually altered his voice more, like he added some digital effects or some effects to it to make it even more rough sounding or whatever. So I don't think it was needed. And they said he went even further in Dark Knight Rises. But yeah, he gets harder to understand with each movie, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's the beginning, and like I think people liked it a little too much, so that they went way overboard in the next one. But it didn't bother me as much as it did in Rises.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will say though, there's times in this one where I don't know, he gets this duck lip going or at least it looks like it, with that being the only part of his face you actually get to see. And then just that, you never know where you're going to be. And it's ridiculous at times. But let's move to a voice that just maybe sends shivers down your spine, and that is the Joker, played by the late great Heath Ledger, who of course did earn a posthumous Academy Award for this role for Best Supporting Actor. First time a comic book actor received a Academy Award. Awesome for that. And so I do have to ask, one, do you think that Ledger, because I know we did decide a few weeks back that Ledger was the best live action Joker, but do you think the Academy Award was earned, or do you think it just they felt like they had to give it to him because of his death?
Without remembering who else was up that year,
right.
I don't remember having a problem with it at the time like I have with other ones, because I think there had been such a buzz around how good he was as the Joker before he passed away that it didn't take away from how good he was. I mean, there's always, regardless of whether or not he deserved, whether what the other people were doing, there's always going to be that, well, he only got it because he died person. But I don't know. I would say, watching it again, I was once again blown away by how good Ledger was at some just minor little, because I was watching him a little more carefully this time because of what we decided, and I was like, yeah, I think we were right. Like, I mean, he was really good.
Yeah, I think this is one of those cases where, yes, I think he was deserving of it for The Dark Knight, but I think he won because he was rising at a pace that they knew he was getting better in every role. Like, I think they were kind of honoring him not only for that role, but even some of the roles he'd done before that weren't recognized, and kind of saying he was going to win eventually, even if he didn't fully deserve it for this specific role. But, let's go ahead and give it to him because we lost him too soon. That's my thought. I mean, he had some other really strong performances as well. So,
yeah. So this was at the 81st Academy Awards. He was up against Josh Brolin for Milk. This was actually when Robert Downey Jr. was nominated for Tropic Thunder. Philip Seymour Hoffman for Doubt, and Michael Shannon for Revolutionary Road.
Yeah, I don't think his competition was that stiff that year. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, those are some pretty solid actors, and other than Tropic Thunder, I'm not super familiar with any of those roles.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
they're all really good actors. I mean, obviously Robert Downey junior
hmm
Yeah, I don't
And I
know
would
how.
say,
I would say Robert Downey Jr. for Tropic Thunder, kind of a joke nomination. I mean, it was a good movie, and he was really good, but that he was never going to win for that one.
right.
Yeah, and I never watched Milk or Doubt, or what was the other one you said?
Revolutionary Road.
Road.
Yeah, I've never watched any of those movies, so I can't speak to the
That was the
quality of.
Sam Mendes movie that reunited Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet.
Kate Winslet, yeah. Yeah, I was going to say each one of those actors that he was up against, I would say deserved it for other movies besides the ones that were nominated for in
Yeah.
that one. You know what I'm saying? You know, Brolin was better in. Once again, the only one of those I saw was Doubt, which was Philip Seymour Hoffman, but he was better in some other movies I saw. But Brolin was great in No Country for Old Men, which I think was before that one, right? That was
Well,
early
I'm
2000s.
not sure about that.
Now,
Yeah.
I mean, we could go down a long rabbit hole on the
Yeah.
Oscars if you wanted to,
Yeah.
and that's a whole nother conversation and a whole, maybe a whole nother podcast. But the Oscars have a long history of ignoring the roles that you should have won for.
Yes, very
And
true.
and
Very true.
in this case, I think they actually got it right. Maybe because he died.
Yeah.
And it would have been one of those like, well, Robin Williams won for Good Will Hunting, but he should have won for Good Morning Vietnam, Goodwill, the one that we did with Tim,
Dead Poet Society.
Dead Poet
Dead Poet
Society.
Society.
There's other movies
Awakenings, yeah.
that he should have won, but there's a whole level of punishment because he did Popeye or Mork and Mindy.
Mhm.
So the Oscars tend to get things wrong, and I think this is a rare case where they actually got it right, and they had to kind of eat their words because they don't tend to nominate or let movies like The Dark Knight or Pirates of the Caribbean or
Tropic Thunder.
Black Panther, movies that should have won and didn't
Mm.
because we genre film, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Well, and that was my question because, Heath Ledger had only been nominated one other time, and that was for Brokeback Mountain, and that was for Best Actor.
Mhm.
And then so yeah, it was kind of that question because I always think about what you just said, Nicholas, like with Denzel Washington. Like I always think Denzel should have won for The Hurricane, and he didn't, and then they later gave it to him for Training Day, which I kind of went,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that I was just kind of curious. Like, did you think I do think that Ledger earned that award, but I was just I was curious. So with that being said, do you think that this performance of the Joker, as iconic as it has now become, do you think that Ledger in this performance redefined the role of a supervillain, quote unquote, in a comic book movie? Like, what do you think set him apart from not only other portrayals of Joker, but other portrayals of villains in comic book movies? Or just villains in general, like not even comic book movies.
One of the things they definitely did right, and I know this is a soapbox that you've been on in the past, for or against the sympathetic villain. At no point was Ledger's performance sympathetic. Like we never felt for the Joker. We never.
Right.
It wasn't like that was my big problem with the Joaquin Phoenix one. Is that like I don't want to feel bad for the Joker. The Joker is chaos incarnate. He is pure anarchy.
But what I absolutely love is that they took that though and turned it on its head. Like they made him come up with these fake stories,
right,
Mm-hmm.
to try to say, "Oh, let me tell you how pitiful my life was," but he's just full of it the entire time.
Yes. And that's one of the things I'm sure we'll get to here that I love the most about it is that he does stick with the comic book story of the history of the fact that the Joker himself is widely considered to be an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
So every story that we have of who the Joker is has been debunked or changed And it's always like, well, no, it's really this guy or really this guy. And it's always changing because the Joker is a notorious liar. Like, he just makes it up on the spot or whatever, changes it to whatever he feels like to fit his needs for the day. Because he is just chaos.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, and let's move on. Let's talk about because it always seems when you do a sequel, you got to have more than one villain. So enter your Harvey Dent, and I know we don't usually spoil any of the movie at the beginning of this, but if you didn't know he was Two-Face, come on. Played here by Aaron Eckhart. What did you think of them bringing Two-Face in only to then, and again, I'm going to spoil this, even though we try to avoid spoilers here, but I mean, come on, this movie came out in 2008, and it's one of the most iconic movies out there, so I'm sure you've seen it by now. But what do you think about them bringing Two-Face in only to then immediately kill him?
I think it's a decision that they probably regretted a few months later.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's the same problem that we had with The Last Jedi. Had Carrie Fisher not died, that movie gets written differently.
Mm-hmm.
Had Heath Ledger not die, I guarantee you, if they knew that Heath Ledger was going to die, they would have written the end of that movie differently.
Yeah, would have went back and maybe changed something.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
that
but-
you could have Two-Face come back in the trilogy and whatever.
But do you think that would have ruined the movie?
I honestly, my one flaw with the movie is the Two-Face story in general. And it's
Okay.
not, and it is partially because you built up this character, turned him into Two-Face, one of the more iconic Batman villains, to just kill him. It was kind of a waste of a major Batman, rogue gallery member.
Yeah, that was one of my. Sorry, when we talked about flaws in the movie, that was one of mine. Where, watching it again, watching the story arc of Harvey Dent, it just feels rushed. Like, I feel like we should have seen him become Two-Face in this one, but then let that story continue in the next movie. Like, if I feel like you introduce him, he has this, to me, seems like all of a sudden change where, why does all of a sudden, because Rachel dies, spoiler alert, now he's obviously wants to be like, he's following the Joker's whims and just wants to, kill everybody. So it was such a drastic change for the character. It seemed like it happened too fast. And then to not really, you don't really have a payoff, for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, you brought up Rachel. Let's talk about Rachel. So Rachel Dawes, no longer Katie Holmes, but now Maggie Gyllenhaal. And here's the question I have to ask. Is it just me? I don't care how many times I've seen this movie. Is it just me, or do you forget two things? Number one, that she is the same character that Katie Holmes played. And number two, that she knows Bruce is Batman.
More of the first.
Yeah.
You think she's a whole different character?
There's definitely like, wait,
For a
that's
while,
right.
at
She
least.
is the one who,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's also, I tend to forget up until kind of the point where she kind of just says it. I forget that she knows that Bruce is Batman.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if she played the character like she wants to forget, like she purposes not to remember, because it's just a weird. Not just the change of actresses, but even the character seems completely different between the second movie. So when we get to recasting, I have a lot to say about about this character.
All right, well let's move on to Alfred Pennyworth, played by the great Michael Caine. I did find out that Michael Caine was actually scared by Ledger in his portrayal of the Joker. So once just showing again how great Ledger was to actually frighten someone with the caliber that Michael Caine has as an actor. Yeah, I mean, how great is Michael Caine as Alfred? Just period.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
The thing about it was why he was so good is he was so different than the other Alfreds we had seen, where he wasn't just, the butler that kind of knew the secret. Like, he seemed like a real partner to Batman and mentor to him, more so than previous incarnations that we had seen.
Yeah, because I love when he talks about, well, I guess I'll be arrested too for being your accomplice. And Bruce says, my accomplice. I'm going to tell him it was all your idea.
Right, yeah.
Let's see. Then we've also got James Gordon, who officially, I guess, becomes Commissioner Gordon in this movie.
Right.
Played by Gary Oldman. And then the great Lucius Fox as Morgan Freeman. I said that backwards, but you knew what I meant.
I knew what you meant.
Morgan Freeman play as Lucius Fox. Again, I'll just say three legendary actors in these movies. It's just amazing, and each of them bringing just their iconic abilities to this. I mean, Morgan Freeman just playing it so straight, like you don't want to upset him, but he's not going to let you know that he's as upset as he is. He's just going to say, look, you do this, then I'm out. But then also bringing in that humor. I love when he confronts the accountant.
Yes.
So you're telling me your boss, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the world, you are accusing of being a vigilante who beats up bad guys for a living, and your best plan is to blackmail him?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely love Morgan Freeman. I did want to bring... Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I was just going to agree with you when you were mentioning the three actors. I was like, all of them bringing, such gravitas to the movie. I mean, it's already like as Nolan, it's not your standard comic book movie, but by putting these three actors and these three characters that they're not playing it like comic book characters. You know what I'm saying? They're not playing it as, they're playing as full-fledged, fully fleshed out characters that, are grounded in reality, which is one of the reasons why The Dark Knight is so well done. And the trilogy, for the most part, is well done.
And the amount of Oscar nominations that you just dropped with that list of names from Christian Bale to Morgan Freeman.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, Gary Oldman didn't get his recognitions till after. I think all three of his nominations have just come within the last decade or so. I know he won for Darkest Hour in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which was his first nomination, that may have just been a couple of years after Dark Knight. But yeah, just and that's just amazing to me to think that someone like Gary Oldman has only recently been recognized, at least in the Academy Awards. I mean, I'm sure he has several BAFTA nominations, which I'm not as familiar with.
Right.
But yeah, Michael Caine, I mean, Alfie going all the way back. I know he was nominated for that. And then I think he won for Cider House Rules for supporting actor.
Yeah. And
I'm not sure what else he's been nominated or won for. And I mean, Morgan Freeman, I don't even know if I have a list, but all I got to say is Shawshank Redemption. That'll do it for me every time. I mean, I know he was nominated for that, but it didn't win anything, which I always hate. But I did want to bring up one other person, and that's the mayor. And I swear, I thought he had a name, but apparently he doesn't.
He's just mayor.
But Mayor, I love just this little tidbit of trivia, played by Nestor Carbonell.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know why I enjoy so much that he plays the mayor in a Batman movie?
Because he's also the Tick?
Because he's Batmanuel from the Tick.
Yeah.
He's the parody of Batman in the 2001 The Tick series.
That's what I remember. That's what I always remember him from. That was the first show I ever saw him on. So whenever he pops up, that's the first thing I think of him being.
Oh, that's the first thing I think. Now, I was a big Lost fan. And he was a character on Lost, so I knew him from Lost too. But no, I still, even when he popped up on Lost, I was like, that's the dude that played Batman well on the Tick.
Yep.
I've seen him in so many things; it's hard to remember what I've seen him in and where. I know Lost, I know the Tick, I know a bunch of, but I'm just so used to seeing him in bit parts and stuff. You're like, oh, It's the guy that looks like he permanently has eyeshadow on.
He does. He absolutely does.
Yep.
All
He's
right.
very versatile. Good versatile actor.
Well, we've already talked a lot about this movie, but let's follow our typical format here. So watch it or read it. So should someone who just by chance has not, if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't seen The Dark Knight, come on. But if they have not seen The Dark Knight, should they watch it or should they read a comic book instead? Tim, how about you?
Watch it. Absolutely.
Right.
No hesitation.
Done, period.
Yeah.
Nicholas?
Watch it. Watch the trilogy. And then when you're done with that, go hunt down some of the source material and read up some.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Read up some of the inspiration. Because there's no direct, like you gave a whole list of things that kind of influence it. But there's not one of them that's like really like enough that you're like, oh, well, if you read The Long Halloween, you're gonna get, like, I don't know. It's just, it's such a good movie. It's hard to be like, go read something instead. Like, it's,
No, I agree. And I pretty much said the same thing. I said, the movie stands on its own. Not just as a comic book superhero movie. It stands on its own as like a crime drama.
Right.
And again, we've talked about the amazing performances. But watch it. And then if you want to learn more, go out and read Long Halloween. Go read The Killing Joke. Add maybe a little context to some of these characters. But it isn't necessary because you're going to enjoy this film. And I know most people who listen to this podcast are already comic book fans. But even if you're not a comic book fan, you're going to enjoy this film.
What's up, dudes? I'm Jerry D of Totally Rad Christmas, the podcast that talks all things Christmas in the 80s. Toys, movies, specials, music, books, fashion, and fads.
If it was gnarly during Christmas in the 80s, he's got it covered. Wait, is there a lot of things to talk about for the 80s and Christmas?
Well, you got the movie giants like Christmas Vacation, Scrooged, and A Christmas Story. There are TV specials like Muppet Family Christmas, Claymation Christmas Celebration, and a Garfield Christmas special.
Plus classics shown every year.
You also jam out to Last Christmas, Do They Know It's Christmas, and Christmas in Hollis. But most of all, it was a time for the most bodacious, best-selling Christmas toys ever, like He-Man, G.I. Joe, Transformers,
and Cabbage Patch Kids.
Yes, them too. We cover them all, plus much more, including standard segments like Hap Hap Happiest Memory, Gag Me with the Spoon, The Other Half of the Battle,
and Chant with the Littles.
So tune in to Totally Rad Christmas everywhere you get your podcasts. Turn the clock back and dive into those warm and fuzzy memories.
Later, dudes.
All right, let's take a trip around the spinner rack and talk about some things from this movie, some of our favorite things, some key things we want to talk about. Let's start off with our speech bubble, our favorite quote. So, Nicholas, I will let you go first. What was your favorite quote from The Dark Knight?
Here's the problem. I wrote this quote down. Let me get this straight. You think that your client, one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the world, is secretly a vigilante who spends his nights beating criminals to a pulp, and your plan was to blackmail this person? And then you went and said it first. And then you went and said it first. So I don't.
Yeah, we all picked the same one.
It's still a great quote.
That's the one that I had. I had that one, and my backup was the one I used at the beginning. Was, how about a magic trick? I'm going to make this pencil disappear.
See, I didn't want to go with the, live long enough to become a hero.
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Because I thought for sure one of you would pick that one. So I didn't want to go with the most obvious one or the one that the internet has grabbed on the most.
Right.
But, apparently you guys had the same thought I did.
It's a great line.
It's a great quote. It's a great quote.
And it's said by Morgan Freeman. It's even better.
Yeah, I like the moment. It's not my quote. I will go ahead and tell you that, but no, it's a great quote, and it's a great moment from Morgan Freeman. Great performance by Morgan Freeman for that, and a great moment for Lucius Fox.
Mm-hmm.
I think Morgan Freeman gave a lot more light to the character of Lucius Fox, who's I think a lot of people don't even know about from the comic books. So I think having Morgan Freeman play this character and play his character so well, like I talked about before the break, people going out and going, I want to learn more about Lucius Fox.
Mm-hmm.
And now looking more into the comics about that character. I mean, I wouldn't have been mad if either one of you had just picked "Why so serious" as your quote.
Yeah, it's overdone.
But still, doesn't mean it's not your favorite.
It was a great quote, but because it became so overused and over, not necessarily parodied, but just it became like
it's oversaturated.
Oversaturated. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah, because you saw it everywhere and on everything, and
yeah,
because it became one of the taglines for the movie almost.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So no, mine actually, I decided to go with people need dramatic examples to shake them out of apathy, and I can't do that as Bruce Wayne. As a man, I'm flesh and blood. I can be ignored. I can be destroyed. But as a symbol, I can be incorruptible. I can be everlasting. And I love that quote because that's Batman. Like that's Batman. I talk so much about how much I love Superman because of the idea he stands for. Well, that right there is the idea Batman stands for. I mean, Batman's more than just the crime fighter, just the guy who, like the other quote is, that just beats bad guys up. He is about inspiring change and giving hope to Gotham City. And that is what that symbol is. And it's the same thing that Gordon talks about with displaying the bat symbol at the beginning when he's talking to, I'm sorry, but that had to have been a I forgot her name in the movie, but it's Montoya. I don't care what anybody says. But, pretty much saying, he likes to put it up there just to remind people, and that he's a symbol. And so I thought that was a great line because that, in essence, is what this movie is about the symbol of Batman and not necessarily the man behind the suit.
Good quote. Very good quote.
All right, so let's move on to our moving panel, our favorite scene. So, Tim, I'll let you go first on this one. What was, favorite scenes, if you want to name more than one.
My all-time favorite scene, I remember seeing this in the theater. I went and saw it twice the same weekend. But the scene that had me the most engaged is the chase with the truck when the Joker's in the tanker truck. Mm-hmm. And, of course, when it gets flipped on its head and gone over, just the practical effects and just how well it was done. That's
what Nolan is good at. Is not using, not as much as he can avoid using CGI. I love Nolan does everything he can to make everything practical.
Yeah. That's always been like my favorite. Of course, it's more like the action scene of the movie. But I love the opening. I love the bank heist and how that all kind of unfolds, and you're kind of introduced to the Joker in that way. And each person gets killed. I thought I was going to get half. We're going to take each person out. So just very well done. So those are like my top two scenes for sure. There's a lot more, but I'll stick with those two.
The truck flipping scene was definitely towards the top of my list. I mean, just knowing how hard it is to flip vehicles to begin with, but to flip a full semi-truck that way, that was just insane. I like that, unlike the movie that people say has actual detective work and it doesn't, this movie has actual detective work. When he's searching, when he's doing the bullet work, and then a lot of the some of the detective work might have been a little illegal with the cell phone surveillance, the sonar stuff, and then the extraditing criminals from other countries.
But I mean, that led to we'll talk about this a little bit more, but that led to kind of some of the themes that Nolan, I think, was trying to express. I think just so iconic, the interrogation scene.
Yes, that's a good one too.
I mean, it's that classic confrontation between Batman and the Joker, which again we see in The Dark Knight Returns, talking about that comic book connection, and in both cases. In both The Dark Knight Returns and in this one, which is why I feel it was an inspiration, you can literally tell Batman is struggling to maintain control because the Joker has clearly manipulated him and gotten into his head, and he's doing everything he can to to, not just end the Joker right then and there. As that, to me, that's a great moment. But no, I agree with you two as well. The action scenes are amazing and wonderful and great, and that's something, again, like I said, Nolan can do very, very well. All right, well, let's get into what I like to call the weird science. This is where I look to see if there are not necessarily plot holes, but breaks in the logic. I understand we're watching a comic book movie, and there's going to be some having to stretch your imagination a little bit, but I still feel that even comic book movies need to follow some logic. And so I am curious if either one of you found any issues with the logic behind this movie, because I found two. I'm curious. Either one of you have anything where you thought that the logic just didn't make sense?
I mean, it's not so much a science thing, but I definitely agree with something that Tim had said earlier with Dent, with the Two-Face. The immediate switch flipping that was like, he was so hardcore about following the rules and taking people down and doing Rico to get every mobster in town at once, and then all of a sudden, like, Rachel dies and he's not like, well, now I have to fight harder. He's like, now I'm just gonna go kill everybody. And
Well, that still makes the decision by the coin, though.
Yeah, but the coin is kind of flawed, fake. Or I guess not at that point. It is before. No,
I'm about to say, before that, he's more faking it with the coin. But once the one side of the coin does become damaged, he really does. If it lands on the clean side, he, doesn't allow it to happen. And then if it,
but I'm guessing those are not the two things that you went with. So
nope, it is not. I don't disagree with y'all. I do think that his at least has a little bit of logic to the point where it is just a snap of the mind. And so I think there's a little bit of logic that holds in there. No, both of mine have to do with the Joker. So the first one is with the Joker's arrest. When we find out that Gordon is not dead and Gordon comes up behind the Joker. How the Joker is displayed in this movie, like Tim talked about with the bank heist. Joker is a criminal mastermind in this one. He has everything planned out to the detail. How did he have that one planned out? There's no way he knew Gordon was alive. That was the whole point. And there's no way in that moment he knew he was going to be arrested. So if that's the case, how did he have that plan where the guy would be brought in with the cell phone and the bomb and he knew what would happen when and how? Like that's my question. I can't wrap my head around how did he have all that planned?
I don't necessarily know if he knew that Gordon was still alive, but I do think he planned on being arrested. He did plan on being taken because he allowed himself to be taken so quickly and easily in that moment so that he could set up what's coming.
Or it was a backup. Like, if this, like, he's got multiple plans. If this one doesn't go, we got plan B, plan C.
Yeah, because he clearly already had the plan of kidnapping Rachel and Harvey. That was already there. I have a hard time just seeing, like, how would this have worked out and then if you're, like you're saying, Nicholas, if he had planned to be arrested, then that completely negates the whole point of faking Gordon's death.
I don't want to give the screenwriters too much credit and say that, they were, I do think, with almost any movie, if you dig too deep into it, you'll find logic holes. This being maybe one of them, but I think because there's a line that Joker said something of it. Do you think I'm a plan? I'm like a car. I'm like a dog with a car. I don't know what I'm going to do. What if I actually catch one? I think that's another place where he's absolutely lying. He truly has everything planned down to as minute detail as he can possibly get to. While he is pure chaos and pure anarchy, he doesn't do things just willy-nilly. Like, he does things for a reason. You might not understand them, but they make sense in his head.
Okay, I'll give you that. But that then leads me to my second one. The ferries.
Mm.
Because in order for his plan to work, he is relying too much on the events happening exactly in a particular way. And in this case, it doesn't seem like he has considered any other possibilities, including the way he reacts. It's like he has not considered any other possibilities. He has spent his entire movie he has spent the entire movie showing how I'm trying to think of the words here. He's undermining faith in humanity the entire movie.
Mm-hmm.
And he shows throughout the movie that people are prone to corruption, that people are prone to fear, that people are selfish. He's doing that from beginning to end. For that bank scene starts it right off. Oh, hey, I got to kill you so that I get more money, but I'm not thinking about the fact that someone's going to end up having to kill me, and so on and so forth. But here in this ferry scene, he doesn't expect anyone to resist the temptation to save themselves. And he has no backup plan for what has happened.
No, you're right. And that's where the logic does kind of fall apart more than the him getting arrested thing. But yeah.
Cause like I said, I'll buy that he had a contingency plan. That if I get arrested, he's got some guys that have already, set in motion. This is what's going to happen. But this is one that, and we're talking about like he thought to the exact moment that it was happening, because he was like, and here we go.
Right.
And then all of a sudden he realizes it's not going to happen, and it doesn't make sense to him. Now, I will say it makes sense to the story they're telling, where the whole story of this movie is the balance between good and evil, within Gotham as well as within a person themselves, which is the whole Two-Face story, and even something that Batman has to deal with. But my question with the ferry scene is, what do you think his ultimate goal was? Like, what was he trying to prove a point about Gotham, or was he just creating chaos for the sake of creating chaos?
Little of column A, little of column B. I mean, ultimately his goal is obviously just to create the chaos, create the anarchy. But I do think, in his way, he also thinks that by creating the chaos, he's freeing people by showing them the dichotomy. And he's, like the true anarchist, or the true person who believes that, you should be free from all, I don't know what the right terminology I'm trying to think of, but there's definitely a group of thought of people out there, and anarchist is the closest that I can come up with, not using it in the pejorative sense, but more like the people who believe there shouldn't be government because people should be able to govern themselves. And I think that he is truly that way. And so maybe he was genuinely shocked that, like, I think there's a part of him that really expected somebody on one of those boats to be like, I don't care about the other boat. Click.
Yeah.
Also, it's entirely possible that neither of those triggers actually worked, and that he was going to blow up one of them at 12 o'clock, regardless of whether or not either one side hit the trigger or not.
Which is what I think I initially expected first time watching the movie. Like, I thought it didn't matter. Like, he was going to have them choose, but he had already made the choice for them. He was going to kill one, or, blow up one or both of them just to show, he had control.
To me, that would have filled in that logical break, is that he had already timed both of them to blow regardless. But the fact that he does do the, and here we go. Like, he was expecting, without his doing at all, one of them to blow the other up. So, yeah. So that's my big one. That is my big one. is just that little break in the logic. But let's move on. Let's get into a little a little. Is there someone in this movie who deserves the war machine treatment? To get a switch. We already had a switch from Katie Holmes to Maggie Gyllenhaal, but if you could recast any character in The Dark Knight, who would it be and why?
Well, she was already recast, but I wouldn't have recast who they recast with. So I didn't really like Maggie Gyllenhaal in this. There's really no chemistry between her and Bruce Wayne or Harvey Dent that I could really see. Like she just fell flat for me. And what you've talked about before, like she seems like a completely different character. I didn't mind Katie Holmes in the role. I think she would have been fine if she stayed in. I'm not going to get into why she didn't come back. If I had to pick an alternate, which is interesting, the two alternates I really thought hard about this. My first alternate would be Anne Hathaway. But of course, she pops up in Dark Knight Rises. And then my other one was Amy Adams, but she pops up in Man of Steel as Lois. So
that doesn't mean she couldn't have played.
Yeah, but I thought they would have had. Well, we saw that Anne Hathaway definitely had better chemistry with Bruce Wayne, or with Christian Bale. I'm not sure about Amy Adams, but I think she might have brought a little bit more life to the character. I don't know. I've never been a big fan of Maggie Gyllenhaal. Maybe that's just my own personal preference, but I was not a fan of her in this movie. She's the weakest link of the cast for me.
You got anybody, Nicholas?
I would replace Aaron Eckhart with John Hamm.
No, that's not bad.
Oh, why John Hamm?
I just think John Hamm could do a really good job as Two-Face. I think he's got such a strong dramatic side with Mad Men and those type of movies, and then he'll go off and do something ridiculously silly, what is that animated show he was doing? I don't even remember what the name of it was, where he was the police. Grimsburg.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
But he has the ability to be both and do them really well, and I think I could. It comes down to Maggie Gyllenhaal I like her in a lot of other stuff. She's a really good actress. She didn't fit right in this movie, but it's more of a function of comic book movies struggling with female characters.
True.
I ultimately didn't like the Two-Face character. I don't know if that was Aaron Eckhart's portrayal of him or the writing or a combination, but I don't know. I would have liked to seen the Two-Face character come back, instead of killing him off in this movie. So
no, I'm kind of with you on that. I also picked Two-Face. I was trying to think of, and I saw some stuff online where it was Matthew McConaughey was a consideration. My vote would be for James McAvoy.
Okay,
that's not bad.
And I think of you think of the movie Split.
Yeah, exactly.
Where he can play both the charming character as well as just utterly insane and terrifying. So I think he could have done a pretty good job with that. I do think, part of with Aaron Eckhart was, I don't know if it was just we didn't get to see enough of him as Two-Face.
Yeah.
But I think he worked as Harvey Dent. I don't think he worked as Two-Face. And so, but again, like Nicholas is saying, I don't know how much of that was in his performance or how much of that was in the writing. Let's get into kind of the story itself. I titled this Crossing the Line. So Batman operates by a strict moral code, but in The Dark Knight, he comes close to crossing a line, especially with the surveillance system and his willingness to use fear. Do you think that at the end of this movie, Batman is still a hero, or is he becoming more of an anti-hero?
The way that I understand the story, I think he's trying to become the anti-hero. Not necessarily that's what he becomes, but I think that's what he's trying to become. Because, his whole thing about, Harvey Dent is the hero the city needs, but then when...
But I'm not even talking about the narrative that Batman's trying to create. I'm talking about Batman deciding to make that choice and the decisions Batman makes.
I mean,
is that turning him into an anti-hero?
I think ultimately from the very get-go, since he does kind of take the law into his own hand, and he is, a vigilante, he is not law enforcement.
Right.
He's kind of already doing the anti-hero thing from the very get-go anyway. It's just how far can he go before he crosses the line of anti-hero to just straight up like criminal. And I mean, I don't know. It's really tough because, like in one hand you're like, I don't want to think of the fact that, somebody could be surveilling me the way he was doing, but it's one of those like, do the ends justify the means?
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And it's
that's exactly what I wrote.
and that is, and I'm pretty sure that's the line that Christopher Nolan wanted us to flirt with and play with, is like, there are certain things that happen and you're like, was it okay because ultimately what happened was good? Like, but does that mean it was still good in the way that it happened?
And see, it's that I actually do think that makes him an anti-hero.
Yeah.
Because that in essence is the philosophy of an anti-hero, is that the ends justify the means. I mean, the Punisher, that's exactly, he was like, that's exactly what he, a lot of stuff that Wolverine, Logan chooses to do. A lot of those characters that are famously anti-heroes.
But I think that Batman has always flirted with that line just because of how he operates to begin with.
Mm-hmm. I don't think he takes it to the extreme he doesn't take it to the extreme as other anti-heroes, but there are elements of anti-hero in what he does.
And I think that ultimately is where it puts him, because he does compromise his own principles. That's the whole reason Lucius, when he finds out about the sonar thing, says, I'll help you with this, but know that I'm no longer working for you. I'm no longer going to help you because this is wrong.
Right.
Although at the end he does show that, he only wanted it for this and he was never going to use it again by having it destruct when Lucius types his name in. But I do think ultimately he has crossed a line, and he knows he's crossed that line, which is why he does make the decision, which is what I want to get into next. So at the end, Batman decides to take the blame for what Two-Face has done. And he's doing that to protect even though this movie's called The Dark Knight, he does that to protect the White Knight of Gotham. Do you think, though, that his decision was a noble sacrifice, or do you think it's a burden that Batman shouldn't have had to take on?
I think it's a burden he shouldn't have had to take on. I think that was I think it was him struggling with what he was, like, once again, he's struggling with how far is too far. When am I going to cross that line beyond what I really want to? So by trying to put someone else in that, White Knight role would, I can't finish my thought, but yeah, that was, but yeah, I think that's what, I think that was a burden he shouldn't have taken. I think he just.
So you kind of agree with Gordon, like he shouldn't have to do that.
I agree with Gordon.
Yeah. Yeah, because there are ways that they could have handled the Harvey Dent thing without destroying Harvey Dent's legacy.
Right.
And still not turn Batman into, public enemy number one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think it was just, his way of trying to force a narrative that didn't really need to be there as much.
And I kind of think the same thing, because, you go back to my quote, he's worked so hard to make Batman a symbol of hope. And I get that he's trying to still do that, but do it through Dent. But at the same time, he's completely tarnished the reputation he's built for Batman.
Right. So you become the one who's being chased, and you've soiled the hope that you wanted them to have. So then, have you crushed their hope? You become hope, and then by making yourself seem like you become the villain, you've kind of, will they have trust in someone else after you've let them down?
All right, so this movie is often credited with elevating the superhero genre into something more mature and complex. Do you think that The Dark Knight had a lasting impact on superhero films? And if so, in what ways do you think it influenced future movies?
I mean, I think it did absolutely impact and influence, just in the way of like all of a sudden you had people like Michael Caine, Gary Oldman, and Morgan Freeman, and somebody who's more of an art house
Yeah.
actress and Maggie
Mm-hmm.
Gyllenhaal. Like you had a bunch of people all of a sudden willing to do this comic movie.
Well, it's not like you hadn't had that before,
Well,
because you had Jack Nicholson in Batman '89, you had Gene Hackman and Marlon Brando in Superman '78.
it also gave us an Oscar winner from a comic movie, which hadn't happened.
True.
Um,
Yeah.
it had, other than certain directors, Scorsese. I think you had some big name directors who all of a sudden were maybe willing to do a comic movie that they would have never been willing to do before, because Nolan elevated it to a height that nobody expected or ever thought. Critics had, I mean, obviously Batman Begins probably should get more credit than Dark Knight for starting it, but Dark Knight kind of cemented it, kind of was
Yeah.
like, because people were talking about Dark Knight as one of the best films of the year, not just saying it's the best comic movie of the year.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so the narrative after that changed, where comic movies kind of got taken a little bit more seriously as, an art form, not just a fluff piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what you said about with Ledger and his performance, and what we've talked about through a lot of this, I think it showed that the villains in a superhero movie could be more complex. Because Gene Hackman was a flat, Lex Luthor. There wasn't much to him. Even Jack Nicholson's Joker,
Yeah.
like he was just the comic book
Mhm.
Joker. There wasn't really a lot of depth to him. And even when you talk about, yes, that Batman Begins technically started this, Ra's al Ghul, and I mean even Scarecrow, if you want to throw him in there, they were kind of just flat, two-dimensional characters. I think it was Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker that showed that we can have more depth to our villains, and then we get characters like Loki. And we get a lot more depth to him, and we get a lot more depth to many of the other characters that were introduced. I mean, more so in the MCU than in DC, probably after this. But and not to say we didn't still have a bunch of flat characters, but you even talk Killmonger in Black Panther, a lot more depth in that character, and so I agree with you with that. And like I said, I also agree with what you said about getting, bigger name actors and directors to come in and decide that they want to be a part of this superhero boom that is happening right here in the early 2000s, as the 2000s were ending. So I totally agree.
Yeah, and I would even say that it probably, because I'm sure there are a lot of writers that were wanting to give more depth to those characters, to the villains, and seeing the success of the movie allowed, you can say for MCU to allow the writers to dig a little deeper into the characters and give them more to do, because I think before then they probably would have said, oh, we don't need that, it's just a comic book movie. But Nolan really set that bar and said, no, you can tell a fully fledged, fleshed out character story, even though it's a quote unquote comic book movie. So I would say that the complexity of the villains, complexity of the characters we saw as the MCU was growing, has a lot to do with The Dark Knight being successful as it was and executed as well as it was.
All right, well, we did name this the best comic book movie of the 2000s, so we probably know where we're going, but let's go ahead and officially bag it, stack it, or trade it. So Tim, just go ahead and knock it out. Let's just get our ratings in.
I mean, there's no doubt you're bagging this one, right? I mean, we're gonna keep it protected and safe. It's one of the best that's ever been made. So it's in my all-time favorites list for a reason. Even though as I mentioned in our brackets, the ending gets a little long winded. I feel like the ferries is a little overkill for the ending, but it's still Heath Ledger elevates it for sure. It's one of the best performances, and so definitely bag it.
Bag it. I mean, I thought about trying to make a joke and go with I'm gonna stack it. No, it's bag it. It's clearly bag it.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's back. I mean, this is a defining film, as we just talked about. And like I said, I wouldn't even say just for the superhero genre. Like, this is a defining film in cinema. Right. I mean, the way the movie explores morality and chaos and good and evil and something that a comic book movie especially had never done before. But this is 100% one that you want to revisit, but you also want to treasure. It's one that should be studied. It's one that should be analyzed. And so, 100% bag it. All right, so let's finally get into recommendations. So is there a comic book story and or another movie that you think pairs well? And of course, we're not talking about the rest of the trilogy here, but that pairs well with The Dark Knight. What you got, Nicholas?
I would recommend going and reading The Dark Knight Returns. That is, okay. I mean, it's like old man Batman versus old man Joker versus old man Superman, but still, like, it's so well done, and so the art takes a little bit to get into, but once you get into it, like it's such a strong book that and clearly kind of defines Batman going forward.
And it also does that good job of Batman like crossing a line.
Yeah.
Like, how far does he go to defend his principles?
And you get a bat tank.
This is true. All right, how about you, Tim?
Yeah, this is a tough one for me. I mean, we've already mentioned The Long Halloween, which I think is a good comic to pair with this as well. As far as another movie, I'd almost go with, you mentioned Black Panther, I'd almost go with that one.
Okay.
Just because the complexity of the characters. But I also say that, I don't think you would have Infinity War and Endgame without The Dark Knight. I mean, just the cinematic magnitude of those movies with what Nolan did. So, yeah. Try not to overthink it.
Well, I decided not to go the route of a comic book. I mean, we mentioned already so many that are good for further context, like The Killing Joke and Dark Knight Returns and Long Halloween. I decided to go for another movie, and I decided to go with Heat from 1995.
Yeah.
That's a really
Michael Mann. Yeah, Michael Mann directed movie starring Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and another Batman, Val Kilmer. But I think it's a good pairing because it is also a psychological cat and mouse between a master criminal and a detective.
That's good. That's a good pairing for sure.
Yeah, and it also deals with that line of moral ambiguity, and the consequences that someone may have to go through with the choices that they make. And so I thought that was a good little pairing to see another well done version of essentially the Batman and Joker story. So yeah, I went with Heat. So if you've never seen Heat, go check it out. Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, who pretty much never make contact in that movie. All right, but let's go ahead and wrap things up here. That was The Dark Knight, our best movie of the 2000s. And I'd like to thank both Tim and Nicholas for joining me. Thank you, Tim, for battling through it with your voice.
Thanks for having me. Hope it doesn't affect it too much in the editing. Maybe you can alter my voice like Nolan did Bale's voice.
We should.
You'll make me sound like this for the whole movie.
I don't know if I want to. That would be the thing. And thank you, Nicholas, for always bringing in your insight. We always appreciate it.
Thank you for always letting me come on and say whatever I feel like saying.
And thanks to everybody for listening. Rate and review the show. Check out these gentlemen's podcasts as well, 80 Flicks Flashback and Pop Culture Roulette. You can find those wherever you listen to your podcast. But for today, for Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.
Good night, everybody.
Spits and seas,